That was the trailer for the HBO feature documentary Stopping the Steal, streaming on Max and Channel 4. And this is Factual America. I'm your host, Matthew Sherwood. Each week I watch a hit documentary and then talk with the filmmakers and their subjects. As the world's attention turns to the U.S. presidential election, January 6th looms large. But as our guest today points out, that fateful day was just the end, not the beginning of the story. Joining us is Emmy and Bafta-winning director and producer Dan Reed. His film, Stopping the Steal, tells the compelling story of an unsung group of Republican politicians, staffers, and election officials who truly did stop the 2020 election from being stolen. Stay tuned. Dan Reed, welcome to Factual America. How are things with you?
Things are, hunky-dory. Thank you. Feeling good.
All right. Well, it's great to have you on. Glad we can make it happen. Just to remind our listeners and viewers, we're talking about Stopping the Steal. It premiered on September 17th on HBO, and it's streaming on Max as we speak. For those of our listeners...
By the way.
What's that?
Also on Channel 4 here in the UK, but it's repackaged. It's called Trump's Heist. And,
okay.
Trump's Heist, the president who wouldn't lose. So it's a two-part series, and it was aired on the same night as the HBO special.
And can people stream that as well?
Stream that in the UK.
In the UK.
Yeah.
Well, good. Thanks for letting us know. So appreciate that. So for those who haven't had a chance to see it, I have, but many may have not. Maybe tell us what Stopping the Steal is all about. Give us a synopsis, if you can. It's a big subject.
Yes, the approach is pretty simple. It's the story of the attempt to overturn the result of the 2020 election in the United States, the presidential election, and it's told in very entertaining and granular detail,
right,
by people who are directly involved. And all of these people are Trump supporters, elected officials and senior appointees in the White House, senior appointees in the Department of Justice. And they all wanted Trump to win.
Yeah.
They're all loyal, conservative, pro-Trump Republicans. And these are the people who tell you the inside story of the attempt to steal the 2020 election. Now, you may ask, well, why did I pick them? I think it was satisfying for me because there is so many very polarized views around every aspect of American politics. And therefore, to get people who do not have a political interest in doing down the Republicans or doing down President Trump, in fact, quite the contrary, they were loyal supporters, to get them to tell the story. I think if they're saying, well, something went wrong here, then you're more likely to believe them than if you have a left-wing, a liberal Democrat saying it, who's going to say that anyway. They would say that, wouldn't they? Because that's their political point of view. Well,
that's what I was going to say. There's been, believe me, this has been fodder for a lot of, as you know, for a lot of documentaries, and a lot of the focus can be on things ranging from the militias to, maybe lack of a better way of describing them, the crazies, the QAnon shamans of the world, who does show up in this film, obviously, but or you'll get there's another angle. Not saying there's anything wrong with this, but there's something that more of a, let's say it's a bit left-wing angle of what's gone wrong here? What's, kind of thing. But that's what I found very interesting. These aren't what people in the States would, or Republicans would call rhinos. They're not Republicans in name only. They are not never Trumpers, let's face it. And they have a lot to lose, don't they? In many ways, by being so upfront with you in this film.
Well, they have a huge amount to lose, and they paid the price. Many of them have paid the price of putting their country and their constitution before their political interests. It's
and your film captures a lot of that. I mean, what they go through personally, but I mean, I imagine they've continued to go through things. Some of them are still in office, aren't they?
Some of them, yeah. So Brad Raffensperger probably the best known guy you've never heard of, right? Never heard of before. A lot of these people. That's another thing about this story, that a lot of the attempts to overturn the election, particularly in November and December, took place in parts of the electoral machinery that usually are hidden from view, not deliberately, because no one's interested, So no one knows who the Secretary of State of Arizona is, no one knows who the election coordinator is there, no one knows who the chairman of the Maricopa County Board of Supervisors is, because no one needs to know, right? These are fairly anonymous Republican officials whose job it is to coordinate the election and to make sure that it is done right. And these were the people who suddenly became very, very famous, because the MAGA base, the grassroots that was stirred up by President Trump and his what Bill Barr calls the clown car of lawyers around him, who listening to who fed his appetite for for trying to overturn the election. On the one hand, you had the people chanting outside, including in Arizona, Q Sherman, because he's from Phoenix, and then you have from the top, from high up, you have people from the Republican National Committee, you have people from the Arizona Party, you have the President of the United States trying to call you and say, "Hey, dude, do us a solid. Why don't you put your thumb on the scales?" And, that famous phone call with Raffensperger that everyone heard, find me an extra 12,000 voters. That sort of thing happens. So it happened in many places. So you've got, the film traces the progress of this through these county level and state level institutions, and it does so, I have to say, very entertainingly. These characters are great, larger than life characters, and there's a lot of drama in it, actually. Because Maricopa County, for instance, the second largest voting district in the United States, hugely important, and so much hinges on the certification of the election in Maricopa. Rusty Bowers, the Speaker of the Arizona State Legislature, amazing guy. He's like a sort of Mormon Clint Eastwood.
Exactly.
and he makes it so big. He gets this call from Giuliani and Trump, and they're saying, "Hey, you know what, Clint? Like, you're doing a great job, man. Fantastic work. By the way, there's this Arizona law that allows you to throw out Biden's electors and replace them with Trump's electors. Do you fancy it?" And Rusty is, as a man of honor and integrity, goes like, "Well, bring me some proof, otherwise, sorry, I'm not going to talk to you." And so these are great characters that jump off the screen, and they tell the story. And then we end up, of course, with Mike Pence, and his chief of staff and his legal counsel, and they tell the story of how Pence was kind of the last ditch attempt to steal the election, and that culminates January 6th.
And as you've just said, I mean, these are people of integrity and sincerity. They're almost sincere to a fault, in the sense that, okay, you're telling us that there's a fraud, but then they just say, "Bring us the evidence." Okay, well, listen. We are listening. We are, as we've already discussed, you and I know, that they're loyal Republicans, voted for Trump. Actually, you can still see the angst in some of their faces. They still can't believe, I think, that this someone that they supported so strongly had tried to pull these shenanigans. But nothing ever is forthcoming, right? I mean, it's just obviously, and they do their duties. They do their jobs. And it is quite remarkable. I think, as you were saying, it's like Gabriel Sterling, who's one of the election guys. It's like, I think he even says, as you're saying, it's entertaining. He was like, "No one should know who I am," right? But I mean, you've done an amazing thing, because the one thing that I and you've already addressed this, is that why, in many ways, even though they were so much in the public eye for those few weeks, their story hasn't really been told. Right? We've focused on other things. Some ways we've forgotten. Maybe January 6th overtook that in many ways.
So that's a very good point. January 6th, I produced a documentary about January 6th that was brilliantly directed by Jamie Roberts. Called 4 Hours at the Capitol. And 4 Hours at the Capitol was the story of the most violent, dramatic 4 hours in that riot. But after that film, I started to think, well, what was that all about, actually? Like, what brought all these people? What was the narrative that culminated in the January 6th riot? And so that's part of, if you like, the origin story of Stopping the Steal, is that I wanted to find out the seemingly much less dramatic story of this sort of slow motion attempted coup. You know, there's such a long time between the election night and January 6th. In American election.
2 months, yeah.
Yeah, it's a vulnerability in the American Constitution, and that allows time for all these shenanigans. And you know, maybe that's something that needs to be revisited. I'm not suggesting that you rewrite the Constitution, but you know, there are these gray areas in the Constitution. And you know, the lawyer that Trump turns to in the early days of January, John Eastman, who we interviewed, he's a constitutional expert, and his view, which is not supported by Mike Pence's lawyer, but his view is that the vice president has the power to say he's not happy with the way the election was run and move the decision back to the state legislatures. And that was a very dangerous moment. So there are all these gray areas, and you know, maybe it's time for a second look at how elections are run in the United States.
Well, you were saying about I know you produced that the Jan 6 doc, but I mean, how were you? I mean, there were a lot of British filmmakers in the U.S. at the when all this was going down, you know. But were you there when it was happening?
No.
I can't remember. On other projects, and
I was doing we at any one time I'd probably have 5 or 6 projects running.
Yeah.
But that must have been the most videoed riot in history.
Right.
You know, so, and we actually had it was interesting because Jamie and I were developing a documentary about Carl Rittenhouse in Kenosha, right?
Right.
And on the night of the Carl Rittenhouse drama, the events, there were several videographers working that night, and many of them shot extraordinary footage. And so we'd been in touch with them, and it just so happened that a lot of these guys and women were present on January 6th, and they shot the best stuff, a lot of them. Yeah. And so because we were already in contact with them, we were like, hey, you trust us, send us your rushes.
Right.
We're not going to stiff you, we're not going to show anything without licensing it from you. And so that's how we had a bit of an edge in the video material that we had. So that's the story to that film.
Okay. And then that's your entry point for Stopping the Steal. Yes. That sparks an interest, and then you following that down the, not a rabbit hole, just following that along, and then you just realize there is a story that's not being there are many stories here, and one that hasn't been told yet.
Well, January 6th, what a lot of people don't realize, January 6th is the end.
Well, exactly.
It's not the thing. It's just the like. It's like you're switching on the TV and you're seeing the last 2 minutes of the film. But in fact, the movie started a long time before that.
Because the thing is that what struck me watching this again, and we all lived through it, but I'd forgotten, that you talk about those 2 month period, and you've got a lot of just snippets here, archival stuff. The number of times that Trump said the election's been stolen, the number of times we have, it was that clown car, as you said, that Bill Barr talks about with Giuliani and co. Just the craziness, but on a regular basis. And it's not even so much that they were spouting this off, but then they're doing media interviews where they're being taken at face value, right?
Yeah.
Okay, well, that's very interesting. Well, we need to get to the bottom of this, It's just absolutely crazy. And that's really was what, so I guess the question I was also going to have, in having done this now and talking to these people, do you think Trump and Giuliani and them really think it was stolen, or do you think it was, we've got to find a way to hold on to power, and
I think Trump's not stupid. He knows he lost. And in fact, there's a Alyssa Farrow, who's his White House director of communications
Right.
at the time, she talks about walking into the room where Trump's watching TV, and he points at Biden. He says, "Can you believe I lost this fucking guy?"
Yeah.
Right. So he knew, of course he knew, but he's gaming the system to stay in
Right.
power
He's a
because
chancer.
yeah, he's a grifter,
Yeah.
but he is a lot of fun to watch, and a lot of people kind of like him. So yeah, in a way, what's worrying is people don't care about the truth, and they don't care about what's real. They just care about their guy.
Well, I mean, it's interesting. I'm just listening to that the second installment of that Gabriel Gatehouse, The Coming Storm. I don't know if you've.
Yeah, it's really good.
Yeah, it's really good, and he's got the second installment, and it's very interesting now to see 4 years on, where this is all where it's gone, and these two virtual worlds that, in many ways, that people inhabit in the United States.
Yeah.
And never shall the twain meet. I mean, it's like, it's just a bit scary. Anyway, I'm going to give I know we don't have much time with you, but I'm going to give our viewers and listeners a quick break. So we'll be right back with Dan Reed, the award-winning producer and director of Stopping the Steal. Premiered on HBO a little while ago. It's streaming on Max, and here in the UK, you can find it on Channel 4. You're listening to Factual America. Subscribe to our mailing list or follow us on Facebook, Instagram, or X to keep up to date with new releases or upcoming shows. Check out the show notes to learn more about the program, our guests, and the team behind the production. Now back to Factual America. Welcome back to Factual America. I'm here with Dan Reed, the director and producer of Stopping the Steal. It's premiered on HBO in the States. It's streaming on Max, North America, and you can also find it here in the UK on Channel 4.
And Matt, I should point out, it's been in the top 5 on Max.
Okay, excellent.
Top 5 alongside, it's fighting it's competing with all the factual stuff, the big movies, and it's been up to number 2, and I believe it's still like number 3 or 4 now.
Not even just top 5 factual. I mean, it's top 5 for everything that HBO's got on
Max,
streaming.
Not just HBO, but Max. So
Max.
Discovery,
wow.
Yeah.
Well done.
So clearly there's an audience. Clearly there's curiosity about, seeing the whole story put together, which is what this Stopping the Steal, what this documentary does, is it puts the whole thing together for you and tells it through the eyes of people who had every interest in calling the election stolen, and yet because they knew it wasn't and there was no evidence, they stayed true to, they put their country and their constitution before their political careers and often paid the price. But it's those people who tell the story, and I think just putting it together and carefully assembling it in this granular detail, I think that is powerful just by itself. This is a story that's been reported on extensively, right?
Yeah,
all the little bits. But as someone who consumes news, you hear this bit and you hear that bit, and how does that all relate? And the documentary just puts it all together with these very, very entertaining, colorful voices, and I think that's its strength.
I mean, I would completely agree with you, and I'm not just being the friendly host here. I completely agree. I felt like it really kind of, there's a lot of, and that even gets back to that kind of the thing we were discussing just before the break about the way things have kind of moved on, and now some people are talking about Jan 6 being a conspiracy and all this kind of stuff. I mean, it just boils it down. You've got the people who were there in the rooms, on the other end of the phone, in the Oval Office. This is how, and they all corroborate each other, and they all saw it the same way, and they all are in their different ways very interesting and compelling figures. And as we've already discussed, they had all to lose. I mean, I think what's her name? Who was it? Stephanie Grissom, who was even saying, because they were talking about people leaving. It's the usual stuff when someone loses, that you try to get another job. And she's like, "Well, we're in the Trump administration. We're not going to be able to find jobs." And now think about someone who was in the Trump administration who then blows the whistle on Trump. I mean, you're not going to get any job out there, right?
True.
I mean, do you think in telling this story, does it help being a outsider, so to speak, a British filmmaker, to come in when you make the approaches and say, you know, I'm making this film about stop the steal?
I think to an extent it does help. I think sort of when you're in the room, it helps. I think it also really helped that HBO was backing this because, you know, then people want to do the interview a lot more because, you know, it'll be screened on HBO. But yeah, I've always found being a bit of an alien, whether that's because I'm a Brit or because I've got a bald head or because or whatever, just because I'm always kind of slightly in one. I look at the world in wonderment often, and yeah, I guess that makes me in a sort of this weird outsider observer, like hovering into people's lives, and people respond to that and they want to talk, and I think the fact that I'm kind of like a blank slate in a way. I don't come to the interview, I don't come to filming with anything sort of written on me that tokens a certain political attitude or certain That's what I like to think. Maybe people see me and they go, oh yeah, he's obviously XYZ, but you know, I don't know.
No, the reason I ask is, I mean, just to say I've been involved with a project also with a British company that doing an American doc, and it's interesting when you do, not when I speak, they automatically assume I've got some sort of slant, but they hear you've got some, the first thing I want to talk about is the BBC. And you know, I've even talked to very similar people to who you've been talking to. You know, people on the right, Republicans, who are like, I can't bear watching U.S. media. I don't watch Fox. I watch BBC. I watch Deutsche Welle. I watch all kinds of, you know, they are looking for maybe it's an old school way of approaching the news. I don't know, but it's become. For them, it's like a breath of, I think, fresh air. You know, they don't need to feel like I don't think they feel like they actually have to be on message as much in some ways.
I mean, there's that sort of myth that the Brits are sort of fairer and sort of more polite. All that. Maybe it's not always a myth. Maybe sometimes, you know, some people like that. I think also the fact that British filmmakers, pretty much all of them, come from that public service broadcasting background. You know, at some point you probably will have worked for the BBC, and the BBC's ethos of, you know, impartiality, or, you know, just doing a good job and not grinding your axe to, you know. I think that imbues the entire, you know, cohort of British filmmakers to a greater or lesser extent. So I think maybe that's a vibe that, you know, people like, and to say they feel a bit freer.
What I would say is, I think also British filmmakers, the number one priority is a good story, I think. And whatever, even if it doesn't necessarily fit with a certain political bent, it's okay. Because every story, if it's entertaining, if it's interesting, if it's compelling, it's worth telling, I think.
And if you're doing factual television, if it's true,
exactly,
there are some facts that inconveniently might not fit whatever your political persuasion is. You still have to tell the story truthfully, because otherwise, what have you got? All you've got is your authenticity, right? All you've got is the audience trust that you're telling them the truth. And so if you're spinning it all over the place, you've lost that, and then you might as well write scripted.
Well, exactly. And I guess in some ways the two are getting blurred in many ways.
That kind of bothers me sometimes. You get, you know, what we call recon in the UK, or what do they call it in the States? You know, when you have a fictionalized section in a documentary, and often now I see there's no indication that it's recon. So you're like, wait, is this supposed to be real? Surely it's not. Usually it's very obviously, you know, faked, or not faked, but you know, staged,
contrived, or
and that kind of worries me, because I'm a bit of a purist. I'm like, well, if this isn't what the audience thinks it is, then you got to tell them.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, now that you've made this film and it's quite successful, so congratulations again on that. I mean, you're not pretending you're an expert in the U.S. political system, but having now interviewed all these people and everything, what do you think? Do you have a view on how you think things are going to play out in November 5th and afterwards?
I mean, it's kind of pointless asking me because, like, I have no clue, and actually, no one else has a fucking clue either. So,
well, I agree. Yeah,
I think the swing. Having said that, the swing states are pretty much plus or minus the swing states that we had last time. And it seems to me genuinely that the whole thing is up for grabs. No one has any clue how the swing states are going to vote. And I guess the future of the terrifying thing is the future of the American, the future direction of America obviously hinges on just a few thousand voters, just a few thousand.
Yeah.
And they don't know who they are because nobody really knows whether
Exactly.
But you think of how different the world will be if Trump is elected president to if Kamala is elected president. I'm not saying, I mean, I think that Trump will probably try and appease Vladimir Putin, and that might have a dramatic effect on my part of the world. And that's maybe the biggest thing that I'm worried about, right? But otherwise, history is unpredictable. You don't know. You might have someone with good intentions in the White House who makes some disastrous decisions or doesn't make the right decisions in time, and vice versa. But it's like the flap of the butterfly's wings. That those 500 people in Nebraska or Arizona who put their vote in the ballot box, and wow, they've changed the whole course of human history.
well, this thought that's come across me having watched this is that you may have a sequel on your hands, but it won't necessarily be the same guys. It won't be the guys in Maricopa County, and it won't be the guys in Georgia, but it'll be very similar people, but they'll be in Pennsylvania and maybe Wisconsin and North Carolina or something like that. But it could be, there is that potential.
I mean, we actually we did a whole filming trip to Pennsylvania, and we ended up not telling the story in Pennsylvania because it felt a bit like telling the same story over again. But yeah, I mean, your point is, what's next? What's the next? Stopping the Steal was kind of the prequel to 4 Hours at the Capitol. Excuse me. What is the sequel going to be? I don't know. Maybe it's all going to just die down, and we'll look back on this as a bit of a nightmare. What was that all about? Maybe it's all going to go away.
A fever dream.
I won't have anything to make a film about.
I think you've got plenty of things to make films about, based on a quick review of your career. I know we only have a couple minutes left, but maybe I'll just ask you, what is next for you in terms of projects and things that you...
We're finishing off. There's probably going to be a sequel to Leaving Neverland.
Okay.
I can't tell you about it or when it's going to be released. But there's that. There's also, I'm actually making a film about October 7th, the attack in Israel on October 7th. And we're doing a big film, the biggest we've ever done, about the end of antibiotics, or the crisis around...
Oh, wow.
Around how difficult it's becoming in certain parts of the world more than others, but this is a crisis that is coming to everywhere.
That's a bit of a departure for you, isn't it?
Yeah, I think it's a hugely important story. It's a hugely important story, and it's one that it's a storytelling challenge because it's about stuff you can't see. It's about bacteria. I think in the wake of the pandemic, people realize that stuff you can't see can really ruin your day. Right. Viruses, bacteria.
Well, I mean, someone told me they had a similar idea in that they think there's a great doc to be made about all the organisms that are in the soil. Yeah. Right? There's all these little micro, I mean, it's more of a nature doc probably, but it's
that's part and parcel of the antibiotic story. Amazing story. Antibiotics, obviously they come from the soil.
Right.
There are poisons produced by bacteria who've been fighting each other in the soil for billions of years, and have discovered ways to kill each other. And then we happen to stumble upon one of these poisons, and we extract it, and we find it doesn't kill human cells. It just kills the bacteria that are giving us causing us trouble. So anyway, it's called Superbug. It's really big. It'll come out next year or the year after.
Okay.
But that's what I'm up to. And but I'd love to do another film in the American political arena. I think it's fascinating. And, that's where a lot of humanity's future is being determined.
I hate to be so glib about it, but it is the gift that keeps on giving, I think.
You could say that. You could say that, Matthew.
We hope to have you on again. Dan, it's been a joy, especially when one of these other projects drop. They all sound extremely interesting. And just to remind our listeners of yours, we've been talking with Dan Reed, the award-winning producer and director of Stopping the Steal. Go check it out on Max if you're in North America, or if you're here in the UK, check out Channel 4. Dan, thank you so much.
Awesome. Thank you, Matt. Stay in touch.
Thanks for listening to that episode of Factual America. As usual, I want to give a big shout out to Sam and Joe, the lads at InnerSound, who ensure we continue to provide you with the highest quality video and audio recordings. Also, big thanks to you, our viewers and listeners, as we embark on a 6th incredible season. Please keep sending us feedback and episode ideas. You can find Factual America on YouTube, social media, and at our website, factualamerica.com. Please also remember to like us and share us with your friends and family, wherever you happen to listen or watch podcasts. This is Factual America, signing off. You've been listening to Factual America. This podcast is produced by Alamo Pictures, which specializes in documentaries, television, and shorts about the U.S. for international audiences. Head on down to the show notes for more information about today's episode, our guests, and the team behind the podcast. Subscribe to our mailing list or follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and X. Be the first to hear about new productions, festivals showing our films, and to connect with our team. Our homepage is factualamerica.com.